Welcome to Salcedo Paranormal. It is Wednesday, August 31st, 2022, and tonight we'll be talking about the ancient paranormal world. I think that's what I'm going to call this series as we go forward, however long it may be. And tonight we will be talking about Egypt in particular. So that will begin shortly. Of course, as always, you can find all of the episodes of the show along with links to social media, ways to donate, and ways to contact me at salcidoparanormal.podbean.com. That's SALSIDO paranormal.podbean.com. Always happy to hear from you all, whether you have comments or questions or topic suggestions, or if you have stories of paranormal experiences, whether they're your own or from others that you trust. Happy to either read those or have you join me on the show to talk about them. And we can go from there. So tomorrow will be paranormal news, and then we'll get to next week when we get closer there. So really, I think I'll just start with this. This idea came about thanks to a show of a good friend, Michael Strange, Trouble Minds Radio, and a phone call on that show that Jen made, and where she mentioned that the planet's energy, whether it's electromagnetic, I believe it was, or either way, just any kind of energy fields, they were stronger in the ancient times. And it just got me thinking about what would that mean for the paranormal? What would that mean for various people all around the world who had these mythologies and these religious beliefs and these connections, at least in their minds, maybe beyond their minds? It's kind of what we're getting at here, to another world, to an afterlife, to just other realms. And so I thought that would be a fun thing to look into here, and just did some digging and into different world cultures, different places around the world. And of course, one of the first ones that popped up the most frequently was Egypt. And so I thought that'd be a good place to start. So I've already put the articles that I used for this episode into the stream chat here, and I will include them in the episode descriptions for the podcast and YouTube feeds. But so yeah, I figured there's this one article, I already have it loaded, that I want to go through that I feel like has a good, decent kind of breakdown of everything. And I've looked at a couple other articles, and they seem to have similar things here. And again, with these episodes, they will just be overviews. There's way too much to ever try to fit into even a series of episodes, I think, with any of these ancient civilizations. At least more than I can wrap my mind around. So this is in no way a definitive look into all of this. This is just based on what I've found and then just ideas that came along the way. And but first, real quick, if I think what we'll do is I'd like to introduce Jen to the show, and we can go from there.
Hey, James, how are you?
How are you? Hi. Good. How about you?
I'm good. I'm kind of wondering how my sound's going to be. I have to use my laptop today. And if it sounds okay to you, it's okay with me. And I'm looking forward to talking about this. It's a really awesome topic, really.
Yeah, the sound's good. So I think we're okay. Right. So yeah, this is in large part thanks to you and to Mike for getting this idea going. And so I want to thank you for that.
Yeah, when you brought it up too about that it might be about the how it would affect the paranormal, I remember when we had the conversation that I hadn't really considered that aspect of it. So I'm looking forward to hearing what you've come across and what you think.
Yeah, well, I figure why don't I kind of summarize this first article, and then I will come back to you, and we can kind of go into more just general discussion of all this, and look at the possibilities.
Yes, that sounds awesome. I'll be listening.
Okay, very good. I will do that. So I'll get going here. Thank you all for being here and for listening. Um, I I really enjoy these, but I'm always nervous about doing these because this is getting into stuff that I barely know anything about. So, but here we go. So this article that I'll be using, even though I included 4 articles in the the description here, basically, this article is tripsinegypt.com, and the title is Ancient Egyptian Afterlife Beliefs. And it's from a few years ago, but I figure when you're dealing with ancient civilizations, that is kind of okay, I hope. And of course, there's new things being discovered all the time, all around the world. So none of this is, I was going to say, none of this is set in stone. But anyway, so this article talks about some major doctrines or major ideas for Egyptian religions that include these basic ideologies, and they are, first one is the belief in an underworld that had only one entrance, and it was basically through the tomb of the deceased. So in a way, it's one entrance for the individual. So that would mean there's different entrance for each person. And then the second one is eternal life. And then the third idea is rebirth of the soul. So you have your, and if you think about that, if you look into it more, you'll find similar, I mean, on a very basic level, you'll find similar beliefs in different people all around the world. So, and a big part of the afterlife in Egypt was the burial, the way they were buried, their funereal and burial practices, and these were meant to help the spirit of the person who had passed make it to the more pleasant side of the afterlife, basically. And so it was, they say in the article here, it was the responsibility of the living person to give the dead, the dead one, their personal, peaceful, desirable afterlife. So this is broken into sections here in this article. This first one talks about the tombs of ancient Egyptian afterlife, and these were buildings that were made, whether they're above ground or buried in the ground, that were decorated, and depending on the social level of the individual, of course. And these decorations were meant to guide the deceased spirit to the afterlife. So it seems like there's this idea that when the person passes for a time, they may be confused, and then but these decorations and these images on the walls and everything and on items, they're designed to guide the individual and basically make things clearer for them. Maybe even help restore some of their memory, maybe, based on what I'm looking at here. So that was the first thing here. And of course, some of these things that were also included were ancient afterlife texts. Well, the ancient, not to them, but texts that talk about the afterlife. and they use some religious spells and decorations inside the tomb, along with just the images to help spirits make it to their afterlife, which is the next section. So this hopefully won't take too long to get through. I think we're moving along fairly well. These so a lot of these first spells that were found were located in the ancient Egyptian pyramids. And these spells were actually carved into the wall originally. Apparently during the Old Kingdom of Egypt. Apparently this was broken down into these different time period kingdom kind of classifications. And so just looking here and more into it. So yeah, the people, the living basically included these special texts in these tombs to help the spirit figure out the path they needed to take to and the dangers that they might face along the way to get to the afterlife. Next section here talks about the Coffin Texts about the afterlife, and in some places, instead of as time went on, these texts, instead of being put on the walls, they'd be put in the coffin, in the sarcophagus, basically inscribed into them, I believe is what they're saying here. And they're used to protect the dead and provide them with the transformation magic, which is amazing to think about that. That would be needed for them to make their journey into this afterlife. And one of these collections of these texts that was included, or at least in part, different versions of it were included in different coffins. One of these was known as the Book of Two Ways. That was the earliest manual to the afterlife. And of course, the next one, this section in this article, is something I think a lot of people have heard about, which is the Book of the Dead. And this was a collection of both coffin and pyramid spells, so just from different periods of time. And it was recorded on papyrus, which is used almost like paper, during the New Kingdom of Egypt. And says they were important for the Egyptians as they offered advice, protection, and knowledge to the dead as they journeyed through the netherworld. And then it mentions books of the netherworld. And some of these books were talked about the second half of the sun god's journey, and some of these books were let's see here. I'm not sure about that first name, but the Book of Gates, the Book of Caverns, and the Book of the Earth. So a lot of text here that they used. So, and of course, the coffins were also a major, important part of this whole system. And these date back to, at first, they were just just used to house the remains of the individual, but eventually they were decorated, and they were made to look almost like the person that was inside them, which is really amazing. And of course, the next section talks about mummification, which is a kind of preservation of the remains of the individual, because of a belief that in time they would need their body again. And let's see here. This is something I'm not as clear on, but so let me see here. They would transform basically the soul could go back to the body and transform it or change it back into a living body. Is I believe what they're saying here. Next section is funeral offerings, and these were items left behind with the individuals that had passed. They were left next to the bodies of the people that they were offering these things to, and they were used to show their affection to their gods that they worshipped, and they even believed that after the death of someone, their spirit could live and as a separate being. So, of course, the next section they talk about here is judging of the dead. And I think we're almost done here. So, but, and this is sort of, you see this in other cultures as well, this idea of the worth of the individual and whether they lived a good or not so good life, and what would happen to them based on that, based on the judgment of the various gods or various entities in charge of that spirit world. So, let's see here. I think that basically covers all that. There's of course the weighing of the person's heart compared to a feather, and then if the heart was heavier than the feather, then it was that was an indication that they had been not such a great person, and they would be basically sent. Let's see here. They would they'd be punished for their life here, their decisions in life. And there's more to that, but I'm not seeing it here in this article. But it seems like there's a lot of views on just what happens to the person after they pass away, and it seems like there's a lot there. And to me, that's amazing, especially with the way the coffins became more important over time, and just the idea that their spirits could had choices and different ways to go and paths to take, and so yeah, very very neat, interesting things here, and especially as it relates to the coffins, but also the pyramids themselves. In the way the different shafts seem to line up with stars and light coming from those stars, and maybe those being paths to an afterlife, to another realm. So I think that covers everything I wanted to go into with that. Let's see here. So if you are ready, Jen, what do you think of all this?
Hey, yeah, this stuff's it's probably some of the most important of when you're looking at the ancient world, because as far as talking about the afterlife and looking at their belief systems, I think that the Egyptian perspective is so important, because even though the focus on Horus and their star worship, it was worldwide, and they all had these different belief systems. I have an echo. Do you have an echo on your end from me?
Not so much.
Okay.
No.
But in every other culture, it's pretty much been like, I mean, you can still find traces of it all over the world, but we don't see it as well preserved as we do in Egypt. And there is something about the magnetic fields and not the magnetic fields per se, but the strength of the Earth's magnetic field at that time. And their emphasis too, that their pyramids line up with pole star region, the region where the sky is like a centralized, almost like a portal, where if you go to the North Pole, for example, and you look straight up to Polaris today, they had the star it was the same alignment, but their star back then was Thuban, and it represents Horus or the falcon. And it was believed that that was the portal to the afterlife, that star, Thuban, thought to be in, I mean, there's some controversy about whether or not it was Draco, because right now we of course know that Thuban is a star in Draco. But at that time, there was a lot of people, astrologers and astronomers, they all argue about, was it in Draco at that time, which was represented by the crocodile, the lizard, the serpent, the great heavenly serpent, all these different symbologies for it. But the point is the pyramid, the first pyramid in the pyramids of Giza, if you line up, and it's actually kind of standing on the ground, and it's great that Night Stalker posted some pictures here, but if you're on the ground looking at the base of the pyramid and looking up from afar, if you're kind of further back, it looks like that kind of stairway to heaven motif with the pyramid going up to the point, of course, of the capstone at the top of the pyramid. But if you're kind of looking at it, it looks like it gives you this sort of tunnel vision, sort of effect, as if it is reaching out into the heavens. If it's the sort of, a visual of the stairway to heaven to that pinpoint at the top, which at that point would have been pointing at these certain particular stars. And that would be the same type of perception from any side of the pyramid, if that makes sense. And the entrance of the pyramid does line up very closely with that star. And even people who are, like the archaeologists and stuff, some say it was directly in line with it, and others say that not quite directly, but very close. And so I think that when you're looking at the river Styx and the path to the underworld, and at the time too, in the Old Kingdom, it's important, I think, to note that in the Old Kingdom Egypt, that not just only the pharaoh and their families could actually go to that afterlife. They would go in, and there's some belief that in their initiation rituals themselves, that they were set underneath in the certain position inside of the pyramids or in certain temples to be in alignment with certain stars, and that somehow perhaps this divine nature of Ra or Horus would enter into that pharaoh, and then he would have order over the world down on the land with the living, just as it has the order up in heaven, as you can see it being the central star that all other things seem to revolve around. If you ever look at that picture of the North Pole, it looks like all the stars are circling around that one point, just like a portal and a gateway of sorts. Another thing about it that's interesting is that their belief systems, the Egyptian belief systems about the soul itself, I think is really amazing, because they had this belief that there was several souls. Some said 4, some say 6. Different archaeologists and Egyptologists have different ideas about this. And some will say 4, and some will say 6, and some will say even 8 different souls making up one living soul. And in death itself, in the burial thing, and how important it is with the way that they were buried and the preservation of the body, they had to keep the name and the body and the certain aspects. Like there's an aspect called the Ka, and it's the bird-headed beings you see in some of these pictures. And it's called the Ka, and it's kind of like that part of the soul. See, it has the head of a bird because it can fly around. So it's the part of the soul that it's like the consciousness of the soul that can fly around. And even sometimes people thought that they had to kind of try to appease it, because that part of the soul could cause problems for people, almost like ghosts today, the way we think about hauntings today. That was that part of the soul that could do that. But then they had other parts, they had several parts of the soul. And they had to keep it all together because it made the person complete and able to make this journey. And they would have to have this type of battle as they were sailing along. And in this picture right here that Night Stalker posted too, the journey through the underworld of ancient Egypt, is like a kind of purplish picture with a big snake. And you have the bird-headed Ka, part of the soul of that person fighting it. But you see, they had to, all these different aspects of it had to, as they're making their way through that tunnel to the afterworld, you might get stuck. They had these other stars close to the star Thuban. They were called the Indestructibles, and they were stars that were constantly very close, um, uh, orbiting around as well that region. And what's weird too, and they were always there, just the same, and that's why they called them the Indestructible stars up there. And I think that those are like types of guardians. They're considered like guardians too when you actually get there, whether or not you can actually enter and be once again with Thuban. Or, with Horus, basically. Part of Horus sending himself down and then receiving it back again. And so I think that has something to do with that for sure. And I've seen references to that in some of the mythology. I'm just looking at the pictures because they're really cool. But I think that it was a new thing that kind of came along slowly but surely, that it wasn't just the pharaoh and his family that could go to heaven, or not, well, to go to this everlasting life of joy. It began to be also, certain priests and certain political figures and so on and so forth, and then the wealthy, and then the rest of the people. And they all had different places that they would be going to and how they would get there and so on and so forth. But the weighing of the heart and the fact that you might get eaten, because the heart was a part of your soul, represented a certain particular one of the souls. But that creature that might eat your heart is usually depicted as a monster of, this beast. And that monster is a crocodile or a great python or a dragon, or like a hippopotamus. And those were all different depictions of the star system at the time. And these, I think, pretty much all of these depictions are representing human-like forms of the different stars, because they believed that the heavens, that they were going to return back. That's where heaven was. Anyway, just liked everything you were saying, and I like all these pictures Night Stalkers posted.
Yeah, no, thank you. And I knew there was more to that. Thank you for filling in the part with the heart and the feather as well, because I knew there was more about it. I wasn't seeing it and I wasn't remembering it. But yeah, and then the pictures, as I always say, everyone, if you listen to these podcasts or YouTube videos, you might want to join the Discord, because sometimes people, Derek often does this, but just different people in general will put pictures in these in the stream chat as we're going, and for everyone to look at, and they are really amazing. Many of them are, and others do that too. I see you there, Boost. Thank you for joining as well. And yeah, so I was amazed at all the different, and I did notice in the couple of articles they talked about. In those articles, they only mentioned like 3 parts of the soul. So that's amazing that there's this debate now, and it's the number keeps on rising as to the parts of the soul, because that makes me think of this idea that other people have had about in modern times, about how in different locations that are said to be haunted, people don't even think it's the entire being. It's not the entire spirit of the person that they're seeing. It could just be a part of that, a part of their energy. That's fractal soul. Okay, there we go. That's a way to say it. Yeah, a part of themselves that's still there for whatever reason. So that's really amazing. That lines up goes across time.
Yes, they had it was like the Ba, the Ak, like AKH, and then the other one was, I think it was like, I think it was the Ka, the KA, the bird-headed thing. But each one of those different things meant something else. But they had that was all one thing, and then just their whole view of what made up a living being. Like they believed that when a person came to, even just into the womb, that they'd be united with this one aspect that was separate from them, but that was a part of them at the same time. And even when they died, that part would still go on, the classic idea of the soul we have today. But then in addition to that, they had another aspect of the soul that may be made up into 4 other fractal points. So they had all these, and then they had the body itself, and then the name. You'll see that a lot of times on all of their tombs, and the idea even today of putting the name on the stone and everything, that it was very important that the being had their name, the person would have their name with their body preserved as well as possible. And also too, that they would have a place for that, for their soul to be in, and then they would ascend up that right out through that pathway that you kind of see. I never noticed that before with the pyramid. Not really. That the pyramids themselves, I always thought about the axis mundi idea of the pole at the north pole of the planet, that there must have been something going on there, but now you can really see. I can see with if you look at the pyramid, it looks as if you were standing far back and down on the ground, it would look like a pathway going up to, like, because of the visual perspective of it narrowing into just one point, that it's acting as almost like an arrow up through that, you know.
Yeah, and the other thing I always wondered about with the coffins, especially the cases where these things are found inside pyramids without a body in them, I always wonder what that was about. If in some cases, maybe very rare, of course you could say maybe someone was in there and then they were taken out, but I always just wonder if maybe in some rare cases, maybe something happened spiritually, energetically, where there was someone in there, but then maybe this process that they all talked about somehow actually happened to one or more of them, and that's why some of these places are empty.
I don't know, but it is weird too that with their focus on that star being a representation of the god Horus, that now today they say that that's not our pole star. We just have Polaris, called the pole star. But in that same occupying that same spot, but Thuban will be returning. If when I was looking at the pole star itself about Polaris, Thuban is supposed to be returning in about, I think it's like 23,000 years. It will again be the pole star. And I don't know, so it's just kind of, they must have known, but that was, in celestial terms, that's like pretty quick. So I think that there's this weird aspect about them believing, not just that they're going to return to life here on the earth, but be living some type of life like life somewhere else. So I don't know, it's hard to say as far as with the mummies, where they went. Of course, yeah, there is the aspect that they could have been stolen. But then on the other hand, there is the idea that they might get the idea of them getting up and walking around. I don't know if that's figurative or not, but it's still interesting.
Yeah, and especially the other part, of course, the whole basis of this series is if the energies were different on the planet back then, different energy levels, energy types, whatever, then maybe all these Egyptian and other beings around the world that they talked about, maybe there was some version of them actually there, paranormal version, some kind of different energy being or some kind of solid being, and there was just more possible portals in these locations that people could go through to see these different beings. And again, that's the part that is amazing to me, this idea that maybe these various beings, whether you call them gods or not, these various beings that they wrote about or talked about, they could be real somewhere, somehow, or at least could have been.
Yeah, I can see that.
So,
and
yeah.
I don't know. It's like a mystery in a way. That's kind of like we're trying to piece it together to try to understand in what way they were seeing the afterlife, and where they even got the mythos from, because they are not the original Egyptians who built the pyramids. Some 3,000, well, some say 2,000, some 800 years ago, 2,600 years ago, 3,000 years ago. Hold on 1 second. I have to check on something real quick.
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, and then also the way time, everything seems to be getting older too, is amazing to me. If anyone looks into that, I mean, there's example after example of that. These ideas that these places and these stories are getting older and older.
Sorry, I had to check and see what my dog was doing. But I wonder if there's about talking about the amount of how strong the magnetic field of the Earth was. I wonder if that could have affected so many things, and it's even possible. I wonder if they could see the spirit realm to some extent, or even like feel it more so, because where they get this mythos from, and where they get this religiosity, or what do you want to call it, this mythos of how they seem to be very sure, so sure, that they made enormous monuments and they built a whole storyline, and their whole government and everything was shaped around it. They had some,
Yeah, it is.
and as if they, and I don't, they came from possibly somewhere else, find the center of what they thought was the center, not necessarily of the galaxy, like the Milky Way, for example, which is supposed to be represented by Nut, the dark, was represented as like a naked woman, the Milky Way, and then the mother of Horus. But they somehow knew, though, even though, that this point of the pole star position that they've lined up in all these different stars all have significance. But it's like they were drawn to that specific location to where, if you were looking, it would be like and I don't think they had photography back then, but we know now with photography, the way we do it, that it looks just like a portal. When you see those stars spinning in the circle around the North Pole, or just the Northern Hemisphere looking up like that. But they knew that, even though it wasn't the brightest star in the sky, just like it isn't today, but they knew that it was like the center that lined up with the pole. I think that's very interesting.
Yeah, no, that is. And
it perhaps, or something. I don't know.
Sorry, yeah. No, it is amazing, all the things that they seem to know about, and we don't know how all the time they did. And yeah, well, this was a lot of fun to look into, and I don't know what group we're going to cover next month, but it should be interesting as well. I think as we go, we'll find more patterns, more common things with all these different groups, and I'm looking forward to that. So thank you again for joining me, Jen. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and thanks for having me on to talk about it. And I loved hearing all the articles and everything. It's really cool, very interesting.
Yeah, no problem. I'll let you go here, and then I totally forgot I had articles about the haunted places in Egypt, so I'll just go over some of that. But you can just listen if you want to, and then talk to you next time.
That sounds great.
So there we go.
See you later.
Okay. Yep. All right. So yeah. So when I was looking into this, I was trying to figure out how to end it. Yeah, this is going to go on a little bit longer because I totally forgot about that part of this. So I decided to look into this more as to if these places maybe were centers of paranormal activity back in ancient times. What kind of activity is still going on there today? And so I found a couple of articles. We'll just go with this one, traveltriangle.com. And this talks about, once I get out of the pop-up here, this talks about 10 places in Egypt that are said to be haunted. Now, a couple of them, they talk about that just homes or buildings that don't seem to be ancient. But they mention the pyramids of Giza, sightings there of spirits wearing clothes from the early 20th century. Even people have seen a few apparitions of what appear to be Egyptian pharaohs there that scared away people from the pyramids one time, or in the past. So, and then of course, residents, it says, there have reported hearing screaming around their homes and areas and voices instructing them to leave the place. So I'm guessing these are places that are close to the pyramids. The next place it mentions here is the Valley of the Kings. This is places basically when they weren't building pyramids that stretched up into the sky. They were digging into the ground to make their tombs for their various important people. And it says this is where some of the place where a lot of Egypt's richest and greatest kings were basically buried. and says people have seen eerie, shadowy ghosts of figures of pharaohs in their full attire roaming around their tombs. So, yeah, this is, and that's, if you think about that, that's apparitions of figures from hundreds to thousands, maybe, of years in the past. Let's see here. The next one is a desert. I don't know how to say that name exactly. Farafra, Farafra, desert, and this is apparently the so Akhenaten. His spirit has been seen by many people there, and he was a monarch who ruled Egypt for 17 years in the 1330s BC, around that time. And he's the one, according to what I've heard and what it says here, who introduced a new faith system where uh, where basically he was in charge and the center of this. I believe is what it was. But either way, he was made a lot of changes that were not approved of by people at the time, and so there's some not the best editing in this article here, but anyway, so I'm looking here. So there's more, but just to give you an idea of these places are still apparently they still have activity. So that's all I wanted to get into with that. I just wanted to show that some of these places that that we talk about in this episode here, they were they appear to have still have reports of paranormal activity in them. So, and yeah, I believe that covers everything. Thank you all for listening and for being patient. Because again, as I always say, these are fun in a way because we get to dig into certain topics, but I'm always still nervous about them. So, thank you all for listening, and I'll be back tomorrow night with paranormal news on the next episode of Salcedo Paranormal. Take care, everyone.